If you are familiar with the tale of the shrew, the screw, just kidding, the turn. What? So at this point, they are roommates, but more importantly, they're also lesbians. Next up in our spooky season saga, another really fun subgenre of horror is the more eerie, gothic type of vibe. Last time was a little bit more lighthearted and silly in nature, and I thought I would switch it up a bit. I have 3 different books I want to talk about that are all under the gothic subgenre of horror. First up, we have My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna van Veen. First things first, the cover. Gorgeous. This is one of those times where you are safe to judge a book based off of the cover. Our main character is a woman who goes by Roos. R-O-O-S, Roos. Roos is short for something, but I don't remember what. It doesn't matter. She goes by Roos. We have a very unique situation here where her mother conducts seances and she forces Roos to help participate in them. Her mother is the one kind of acting like the head honcho and all this stuff, but Roos is the one portraying herself to be possessed by these people's loved ones, and she's secretly making noises under the table to startle the guests. She's the one who's actually making this whole thing believable and this whole thing work, and so they're doing this for money. But the thing about it that you might not expect is that there is a legitimate supernatural element to this. Sort of. Is there? We'll see. Because Roos actually does have a connection to the spirit world. She has a specific spirit that not only can she contact, but they are bound to each other. They call it the spirit companion. And her spirit companion is named Ruth. So we have Roos and Ruth. Everything that's happening at the seance regarding other people's loved ones is completely fabricated. But she does have this real spirit companion who can essentially possess her if she allows her to. It'll be much more of a protective thing. If Roos is in danger, then Ruth. See, the names aren't that confusing when you're reading it, but I feel like as I'm saying it, that it's sounding confusing. Maybe I'll just say her companion. When something happens, if she becomes in danger, then her spirit companion can kind of possess her body. Her spirit companion is much more aggressive in nature and isn't limited by the same sorts of fears and trepidations that a regular person would be. So because she's not subject to those, she will do what needs to be done in order to protect Ruth. The spirit companion Ruth has her own backstory because she was a person who passed away, and one thing led to another, and they became bound to one another. There's lore to explain, but in theory, a spirit companion is supposed to be a spirit that is bound to a person, but also acts as sort of a middleman between a person and the rest of the spirit world. But that's not actually what really happens. They're just sort of playing along with this seance, and the fact that Roos has a real spirit companion is just sort of a coincidence. And basically the story unfolds when somebody comes to one of the seances named Agnes, and she is there because she wants to see her late husband, and she becomes quite taken with Roos as she witnesses this seance, and she asks the mother if she can pay for Roos to come live with her. The mother, when the price is high enough, is willing to sell her daughter, basically. We always have this element of the spirit companion and how that's affecting Roos and how that is affecting the rest of the relationship between her and other people. But it turns out that this woman, Agnes, has her own spirit companion. the insane things that happen due to the relationship between these women evolving, the effect that their spirit companions have on the story, and in the oh, the push and pull of that relationship between the living and the dead. There's so much going on in this story. I don't even know where to start. There's so much going on. We're seeing this story through the lens of Ruth. Because of that, we take her spirit companion, Ruth, very much on face value. And when we're introduced to Agnes, and Agnes says, well, I also have a spirit companion, it doesn't seem that far-fetched because Ruth has one, right? But it does become something throughout the story where the possibility that this isn't real and that both of these women are mentally ill suddenly becomes a possibility as the events transpire throughout the story. And by the end of it, you're really not sure if the entire premise of the story is real, or if you have a mentally ill woman, Ruth, and then another mentally ill woman, Agnes, who kind of jumped off of going to this seance and meeting Ruth, and oh, she has a spirit companion, and she kind of also being mentally ill in her own way, kind of piggybacking off of that concept, and then her delusions kind of growing off of that premise. The thing that brought about the spirit companion for Ruth was childhood trauma. But just like a lot of mental illness or hallucinations or delusions or personality disorders, any of that stuff, it often is triggered by trauma, particularly childhood trauma. These sorts of things that make you think that it could be more of a mental ailment. The nature of the relationship between Ruth and Ruth. There is this feeling from both of them that they need each other. But there's also this power struggle sometimes about, that Ruth, the spirit companion, can possibly be a bit of a loose cannon. The intricacies between Ruth and her mother, and then the role that Agnes takes on as they're introduced to each other, the relationship between Agnes's late husband's sister also lives on the property with Agnes and now Ruth. And so that adds a whole nother element of drama. A lot of commentary on here about trauma, unhealthy relationships. There's so many just intricate dynamics in the book that I just enjoyed so much. It's not a secret, though, as you're reading this, that things do not end well. Between the chapters, you have Ruth being interviewed by a doctor, and this doctor is trying to determine if Ruth is fit to go to trial. So you know that people have died and that Ruth is possibly going to be blamed, but you just don't know the details. The story is basically being told as Ruth trying to give her story to this doctor to explain her truth of what happened as they were living at Agnes's, and how some people ended up dead. Because of this constant commentary and relationship between the living and the dead, it can kind of gets into how easy it is to romanticize people after they're gone. That sometimes we do that on behalf of other people. The way that Ruth views Agnes's late husband versus the way that Agnes, who actually knew him, views her late husband. Things like that. When you're forming new relationships with people and they have that sort of baggage, that kind of the loss of a loved one, even though that person is gone, it can still sort of create this sense of jealousy and insecurity. And so you get into that subject, but in particular because not only is there jealousy for Agnes's late husband in the mourning of what once was, but also you have somebody like Ruth's spirit companion, Ruth, who there is a more tangible nature to their relationship. And so you really get into kind of the nature of relationships with people who are no longer here, and how that affects the relationships of people who are still here. Not just people per se, but how memories can haunt you. Sometimes when it's a memory from someone that you loved very deeply, how desperately you want to be haunted by them. I thought that was a particularly sad line when somebody passes and your heart is just aching for the person that you lost, and you just crying out and begging them to come back and haunt you. Just please don't be done with me yet. Like, if you can come back in any capacity, please do so. And just that feeling of wanting to be haunted by somebody or something, or even just specific memories that it's painful but that you don't want to let it go. I thought that this story was so beautiful, and it definitely has just those dark, eerie, haunting vibes to it. I enjoyed it so much. Next up, we have one of my books that I got from Blackheart Books, and that is Einhallow by Tim McGregor. So if you recall, this was about an island, the Orkney Islands, specifically one called Einhallow, and that there's a lady living there. This is also Agnes, an appropriate name for the times. So she lives there with her family, her husband, and her young children, and then all of a sudden this man comes to the island, and that man is Dr. Frankenstein. He's kind of mysterious and he's there to do his work. And the book is about this forming relationship between Dr. Frankenstein and Agnes. So you have his OG monster running around this island freaking everybody out. They never really see him. They're just getting glimpses or seeing footprints or shadows, slightly strange occurrences that is leaving everybody a little on edge. And because Dr. Frankenstein did not necessarily plan all of this out very well, he just sort of went to this island because it was secluded and he wanted to take advantage of the isolation, I suppose. He didn't really make a solid plan for how he was going to eat or just exist or have any sort of companionship besides his monster. And so he ends up going to Agnes's husband. The story is written from Agnes's perspective, but she always just refers to her husband as Mr. Tallak. They don't have a very affectionate relationship. It's one of those old-fashioned marriages where he was just some old dude and he was a widower. Her thing is that she is a very large woman, and by large I mean very tall, even taller than the men. She's just kind of looking down at everybody, so it wasn't going to be easy for her to find a husband given her appearance and the way that people are. So when there was this old widower guy, and he seemed nice enough at the time and he was willing to marry this big tall freak, she was highly pressured to commit to it, even though there was a different boy when she was young that they liked each other, but he was not a suitable match, so she was pressured to marry this old guy, and so they did not have a very healthy, loving relationship. It was very transactional, with her being much larger than him, but trying very hard to conduct herself in the way that a feminine woman would, which is to not beat up your husband just because he was beating you up. Like, she's trying to take it because that's, most women wouldn't have a choice in the matter, and she could beat him up back, but she feels like she shouldn't because she's like, as a lady, it's not ladylike. I think that sounds so fucked up, but basically that's what it is. It's very bold for her to defend herself when he is not being kind to her physically or mentally or emotionally. And so she's not happy in her marriage, and it's very easy for her to be intrigued by this stranger who's mysterious. He clearly has a secret. So when Dr. Frankenstein goes to her husband, Mr. Tallak, and he says, "Hey, I didn't think this through, my guy, and is there any chance that your wife could bring me food? Because I don't have any. Because of course he's not going to ask Agnes, he's going to ask her husband. And then so he tells Agnes, like, okay, well, I'm going to get paid for you to go bring him supper every night and kind of clean up around his little cabin that he's rented. And so she does that. That's kind of how the relationship forms. She starts going over there every day with food for him, and every time she goes over there, it's real weird. Like there will be blood on the walls, and there's paperwork everywhere, and there's all these, different liquids. And she sees all this evidence of the work he's doing, but she never actually sees the monster. So she really doesn't have a concept of what he's doing. She just knows it's weird as hell. I'll kind of leave it there. It's basically about this relationship forming with Dr. Frankenstein. His subplot with everything going on with him, it lends itself so well, these secrets and these mysteries, the sorts of things you expect with a Gothic type story. It just lends itself so well to just intricate, complex, compelling relationships. The relationship between Agnes and her husband, but her children, and what's forming, the nature of what's forming between her and Dr. Frankenstein. They're getting very close very quickly, but is there something actually real propping up this relationship, or are these just two traumatized people with heightened emotions thinking that they're closer than they actually are? Or are they actually coming together and finding somebody that they can feel safe with? And you're not really sure, because we're reading it through Agnes's perspective. You're not really sure if the relationship is what it seems to be, or if it's just wishful thinking on her part. There's a lot of very heavy subject matters being discussed. A lot of very intense stuff happens in the book, like within subplots of the story. I don't want to spoil it, but just everything that happens towards the end was just, it wasn't even eerie anymore. It felt heavy. It felt so real. There's so much despair throughout the book. I felt for Agnes in this book. I felt really bad for her. Like so many people, your life is so unlikely to work out the way that you hope it will, but it's always the regrets that get you, the what ifs. That's something that she suffers from a lot. What if I had stayed with that boy who actually liked me and I liked him, but he wasn't a suitable suitor, so I did what I was told to do, and now I'm unhappy. But what if I had? And those experiences shaping the decisions that you make now, the past forming the present. I regret what I gave up so much. It was a regret that she had, and how she wished so badly that her old boyfriend, Jamie, I think his name was, would come to the island and come sweep her away and rescue her and her children. She loves her children very much. It's just her husband she doesn't like. And how that kind of seems to form her decision making with Dr. Frankenstein, being afraid of making a mistake again, of being filled with regret, of afraid of the what ifs, and how that kind of affects the way that she makes decisions now. It kind of made me think about, something my parents always really drilled into me as a kid. You can do almost anything you want. You just have to decide if you're willing to live with the consequences. And that's always kind of the big thing, is she's constantly questioning, is what are the consequences of me doing XYZ? What are the consequences of me not? She's just so driven by her regrets. And there's just such a tragic hopefulness to her character, that despite everything, that maybe it's not too late, and maybe things could be better, and maybe and it it hurts me. She really broke my heart. I guess the last thing I'll say about Einhallo is just that there isn't a dog in this book, but there is a goat named Daisy. So I'm just letting you know there's a goat. Okay, and last up we have Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito? Feito? God damn it. Okay, so while this is still gothic for sure, the vibe of this is very different from the last two books. Our lady here, our main character, is Winifred Noddy. She is the new governess for the Enzer house. And at the Enzer house, you have the mother and the father and the whole staff of the house, obviously. But most importantly, you have the two kids. You have a daughter, Drusilla, and a son, Andrew. As the governess, she is responsible for the children to basically act like a nanny, a tutor, and essentially a parent. You know, she lives in the home and she is responsible for the children. And the parents are just sort of there. Now, usually, when you have a situation, I'm sure you've probably seen a TV show or movie, or you've read a book. You know, this is all very like the turn of the screw, right? That usually, when a governess goes and takes care of a bunch of kids and it's a horror, usually it's the house or the children who are like haunted and freaking the governess out. But this is a little bit of a twist on that, where the governess is actually the creepy one. It's called Victorian Psycho. So this is very American Psycho, but it's the governess is the psycho. I got a little nervous when I first started this book because I am not the biggest fan. They're the hair. Okay. I'm just not the biggest fan of the sassy girl trope. Like, I don't know. Those characters can often kind of annoy me when they just think very highly of how clever they are. And how clever they are is just having kind of trite one-liners in response to anything that's happening, and that's like their entire personality. So I got a little nervous at first because it seemed as though this was going to be a governess who was just kind of doing randomly weird things and then being sassy about it. And I was like, I was a little bit uncertain. But the author really won me over. She really did, because as I kept going, I was like, okay, we've established that Winifred does not experience fear. So I still thought that some of her behavior just seemed sort of weird for the sake of being weird. But you do come to understand that this character does have many sexual and otherwise carnal compulsions. And so that's something that you see throughout the book. Her at times struggling with her compulsions, but it's not random things. It's always harmful and grotesque things. You come to realize that this character, Winifred, is not just sassy with other people, she is also messing with us, the reader. She'll say something happened. You quickly realize this is not a reliable narrator, because she'll say something happened and then immediately be like, well, that obviously didn't happen. Please keep up. Like, be serious. And then she'll just keep going. You can't expect this book to be a coherent timeline. It is not. She'll jump ahead and say, oh, maybe this happened because of this. Oh, wait, that didn't happen yet. And then jump back to where we were. So it can be intentionally confusing at times. You're jumping around at possible futures, things that may or may not have happened. There's things that I think are supposed to be concrete parts of the plot, but I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. There's a secret that is revealed, and I'm not sure if she was even telling the truth or not, or if she was just saying that to spread chaos. But she just really enjoys terrorizing people. She loves doing things specifically to make the staff think that the house is haunted. She's not afraid afraid of hurting people though. She puts these children in dangerous situations. There's one point in the book where she suddenly realizes that she has a loose tooth in her mouth, and she's not sure whose it is. It's a chaotic energy. Again, I'm not always on board with the sassy girl trope, but I did think that the author is very funny, and I thought that the way that this character describes people in particular, if she's talking about a woman who's kind of uptight, instead of saying, oh, she seems uptight, she'll say, that's a woman who's never held a penis before. And something that I thought was so incredibly funny, which, tiny spoiler, it doesn't even matter. But she's supposed to be teaching them French. And that's something that's being portrayed throughout the book, like as part of their studies. Despite the moments of chaos, she does portray her also doing her governess duties, at least the bare minimum. And then there's a part where this whole time we thought she was teaching them French. And then there's just a scene where I think it's Drusilla is supposed to be speaking French and it's just gobbledygook, and she's like, well, I wasn't actually teaching them. And so the idea that this entire story, we've been under the impression that she was teaching them French, and she was only pretending to teach her French. She was just making up words. And it's like all of these things that I'm describing seem more, not innocent exactly, but just not malicious in nature. But it is, like the book is. There is plenty of that stuff. I just don't want to spoil it for you. This book has elements to it that are pretty nefarious and malicious and violent. It has all that stuff in here as well, but you have this sort of Gothic setting, and it's kind of mocking the sort of prim and proper behavior of those times, how highbrow people tried to portray themselves to be, but really they were so barbaric in a lot of ways. There's commentary on that sort of stuff about what you present to the world versus what you really are, and commentary on the treatment of women, and insinuating that women are incredibly fragile and yet simultaneously treating them so terribly. So despite my initial reservations, I ended up really enjoying this. I wouldn't describe it as eerie per se because of the humor that's throughout the book, but it's definitely Gothic and it's definitely horror. I enjoyed the change of pace, and I think it's kind of fun to combine that sort of haunting setting with this sort of sarcastic, droll sort of narrator. The juxtaposition of it is fun and different. That being said, I definitely, this one would be the most controversial in terms of the writing style. I don't think that this book is for everybody. I think some people would find this confusing and unpleasant to read because of that. You have to not take it too seriously, because there's things, if you took everything this narrator said literally, then there would be a lot of plot holes. There'd be a lot of things that didn't make sense. But because you're looking at this from the perspective of a narrator who just says a lot of shit, like she's just saying things all the time, and you can't really take everything she says at face value, and that's part of the fun of the book. It gets so much darker than just lying about teaching them French. So those are all the Gothic books that I read. I would recommend all of them. If you want the more traditional sort of Gothic vibes, I would go with the first two. But if you're feeling bold and you want to switch it up, then I would definitely recommend Victorian Psycho, but only if you're wanting to switch it up. Something a little bit odd. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time. Bye. If you saw that video from my book haul, then you'll recall. If you remember my book haul, then you will recall